Hello and welcome everybody to the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. I'm Sean Hammond, Chicago Bears beat reporter for ShawLocal.com. Joining me live from Indianapolis today at the NFL Combine is our friend and colleague, NFL analyst Hub Arkush. Hub, how you doing this morning?
Doing good. It's been an interesting week so far. Combine changes a little bit every year. It seems kind of a little more laid back this year for some reason. And obviously, the news breaking about Jalen Carter the day he was supposed to speak to the media made things kind of interesting. But for the most part, this is where everybody who covers the NFL is this weekend. And, it's been good so far.
Hub, I'm getting some feedback. Guys, in the comments, if you're hearing feedback, let us know on Hub's audio there. Or my internet connection might be terrible. Can you hear me all right, Hub?
I can hear you fine, yeah, and I can hear me fine, but I guess that's normal. So
Maybe it's a problem on my end. Sounds good. Okay, you guys don't hear any problems, so this must be a me problem. Yeah, we're working on hotel Wi-Fi's here, so if there's any issues, bear with us, guys. Hub, big news yesterday, of course, was Jalen Carter. There's a warrant out for his arrest. Obviously, he has been in that discussion for that top pick. What do you make of all this news with his potential involvement in that crash down in Georgia?
Well, Sean, I think what we have to do is be careful for a little while until we get more news. There's no question at this point, since he is being charged, that he was involved in some way with the car racing that was going on. And tragically, two people passed away. That said, the charges that have been or are being filed against him are misdemeanors. And so we just don't have enough details yet to know how serious this could be in terms of his future, if you will. That said, it's just, obviously a tragic story that they had just won their second straight national championship. They were partying a little bit. He has released a statement in which he claims that there is a lot of misinformation going around. I haven't seen anything that sounds like misinformation. I think most reasonable journalists are trying to be careful, wait until we find out more news. But the bottom line is that he had a chance to be the number one overall pick. I don't think by the Chicago Bears. I think the Bears would trade that pick before they would take a defensive lineman with it. That's not going to happen. I think we can say that safely at this point. There is going to be, some aftermath to this that isn't going to go well for him. But until we get more information as to, what actually went on that day and what his involvement was, I think it's best to be careful and not accuse the young man of anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally a great point, Hub. How will this affect his status here as potentially a top pick?
Well, again, Sean, until we know, specifically what he's been charged with. Once he is charged, there is going to be a trial, planned at some time. Once we know what the potential results of that trial could be, we'll have a better feel. Right now, all we know is that he's being charged with 2 misdemeanors. And so if that's where this ends, if he's charged with a couple misdemeanors, and even if he's found guilty, it'll concern some teams, about who he is as a human being. I thought that the release that he put out, in the way he handled it was a fairly good release. I'm sure he had some help with that. I thought it was, appropriate. He denies any, bad activity in this, and that we need to wait and learn more about. But there's no question that there is going to be some result from this that is going to have him drop down the board a little bit. Now, whether it goes from being the number one overall pick to, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think that's probably what everybody hopes for is that he's relatively innocent and that this shouldn't have a tremendous, bad outcome for him. But the police in Georgia have said, that they're still investigating, they're still learning more. And if it turns out that he is more involved in this, I mean, this could cost him a career. All the doors are open right now, and we just don't have enough facts yet to be able to speak fairly on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting threads here with this story. I would encourage anyone to go out and read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution story. They had a really well-reported story with a lot more details than anybody else had as far as what exactly the police were looking at and how we got to this point with Jalen Carter. There's still a lot to parse out, and I do think this is going to affect his draft status. But like you said, Hub, how much? We need more answers before we can really say how much, because at the end of the day, in the NFL, and it's just a fact of the NFL world that we live in. A couple of misdemeanors is not the end of the world for a player's career. Obviously, the optics of this whole situation are kind of what makes it look worse than that. If he was in that position where he was, if he was in that situation that the reports say he was, but we're going to have to learn the facts, and obviously the authorities down there are going to have to, they're going through that process and trying to figure out what exactly happened, what exactly Jalen's involvement was. So Hub, if you're the Bears, let's just say that Jalen Carter is off your board for the number one pick. How does this change the calculus for how you go about that pick, how you go about potentially if you still want to trade the pick?
Yeah, I don't think this has much impact on the Bears. Everything that makes sense, first of all, beyond everything that we've heard in the last month or so, is for the Bears to trade that pick. Unless they're not telling us everything and they're thinking about taking a quarterback, because that's who normally goes with the first overall pick, they're going to trade that pick. And the question is, how much can they get for it, and how far down do they trade? Because if they trade just to 3 or 4 or 7, then Jalen Carter is still in the conversation, assuming that he has no serious outcome from this. But I think that the Bears clearly, well, I shouldn't say clearly, but in my opinion, it's clear their greatest need is defensive line. They need at least 2, maybe even 3 starters on the defensive line. They need some Pro Bowl type pass rushers. Jalen Carter is all those things. The defensive line appears to be the most talented position group in this draft, and he is pretty unanimously the best of the group. And so in that regard, you would think there'd be an impact for the Chicago Bears, but there's a lot of good defensive linemen out there. And if this whole situation does not run its course between now and the first day of the draft, a lot of teams are just going to be, too worried about taking a chance on him. And so, I don't think it has a tremendous impact. I don't think it has much impact at all on what the Bears are doing to prepare for the draft. But again, I don't want to keep repeating the same thing. It's going to have a huge impact on the future of Jalen Carter.
Yes, it certainly is. Before we get too deep, I want to give a shout out here to our sponsors. Marengo Guns, always buying, always paying top dollar for your guns, ammo, and military items. Come see the experts at Marengo Guns. Open 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 days a week. So you mentioned the defensive lineman. Obviously, we're talking about Jalen Carter. I don't know about you, Hub, but I was impressed in listening to Will Anderson during his media session the other day. Obviously, I'd seen him on tape. I'd seen his experience at Alabama, but just hearing the young man talk, I thought he was a really good interview, gave some really insightful answers. What are sort of your thoughts on Will Anderson, and is he potentially a can't miss guy who might make the Bears want to stay at that number 1 spot?
Not at number 1. No, again, it's just too high, but he could very well be their first choice. Listen, Jalen Carter, prior to this unfortunate incident, was, I think, pretty much unanimously considered the number 1 overall defensive lineman, but not by everybody. I've talked to some NFL people who have a few other concerns about him, about his seriousness about the game, about how hard he works at it, about how focused he is. And I'm not saying that there's any negatives in there in any way. I'm just saying several teams have raised that concern. There's a reason that, Richard Dent was an 8th-round draft pick and still ended up in the Hall of Fame. You don't have to be the first overall pick to be great at what you do. And when you look at a kid, like Anderson, he is not far off of Carter, and probably will be, just with what we know right now, the first defensive lineman taken. I think that right now you could get him somewhere between 4 and 10, and assuming the Bears trade the pick, he could still very well be on the Bears radar. You look at kids like Trey Wilson and Nolan Smith. I mean, there are good first round defensive linemen out there, and I think until we know that the Bears make the trade and where they end up in the first round, it's too hard to say, what they might do. Their second greatest need, I believe, is at wide receiver. There is only really one wide receiver, and that would be, Quentin Johnson, who I would take in the top 10, shall we say. That might even be a little high for him. There's going to be a lot of good wide receivers available in the second half of the first round. Once you get past that, there's offensive line, probably the third best position. Well, I should say third, maybe the second best position group in this draft is the offensive line. And there's some great offensive tackles out there. I think the Bears are probably pretty comfortable that they got lucky in the 7th round at left tackle, but they need a right tackle. They need a couple guards, and so, one thing that this is going to sound silly, but it's true. They're going to take the best player available, and even if it's not their greatest area of need, I'd be very surprised if they took a cornerback. Cornerbacks are very deep in the first round, but that's an area where they appear to have some young talent already. Beyond that, they could do almost anything. And, I think defensive line is something to keep an eye on. I'm just not sure that Jalen Carter is the guy we should be watching right now.
I'm with you, Hub. I mean, that secondary, they have a lot of young talent there already. They got some veterans and Jalen Johnson and Eddie Jackson. And it would surprise me to see them go that way early, certainly in the first round. Not that they couldn't do that later as well. But so, Hub, you mentioned those wide receivers. Are you a Quentin Johnson guy over, say, a Jordan Addison at this point?
I really like Quentin Johnson. I think that, it's kind of like Jalen Carter again. He's even probably an easier number 1 overall for me than Carter is. I don't see any negatives. The guy is 6'4", 215 pounds and runs a 4.4 40, and he is a big play stud. And, when you look at what he did at Texas Christian, it's all about the big plays that he makes, and that's what the Bears need. Now, it's interesting when you look at the Bears wide receivers. They already have plenty of size. They've got a couple big guys. They don't have enough speed, but Johnson gives you both. And I'm not, as far as Claypool, I don't know what to say at this point. They clearly overpaid for him. There's no question about that. That 2nd round pick now turns out to be the 32nd pick in the draft. He may still become a very good NFL receiver, but you got to look at his first 3 seasons, not just the disappointment of what happened when he got to Chicago and, he had the injury and that hurt too. So it's kind of, I look at Claypool the same way that I look at Justin Fields right now. It's too early to quit on these guys, but you really don't know what you have, and I think in the case of Claypool and the wide receivers, though, that you need a number 1. And so if they took Johnson in the first round, if they ended up picking around 8 or 9 or 10, I wouldn't have a problem with that at all. I think it would be a very good pick. There is other talent, Zay Flowers, Anderson, there's plenty of guys that you could get who could turn out to be great wide receivers. But to me, Quentin Johnson is clearly the guy at that position for this draft. And if that's where the Bears go in the first round, that's the guy I'd want them to get.
Guys, if you're listening, if you're commenting, I do see your comments. We're going to get to some questions here shortly. A couple other things I wanted to hit on before we do that, though. We were talking about where these teams value these guys. Ryan Poles was telling us the other day about how he color codes his draft board. blue players are the top prospects. The question that he, of course, is not going to answer is okay, well, how many blue players do you have on your board? Because that could certainly affect what he wants to do, how far he's willing to trade down if he can still get some of those top rated prospects on his board. Hub in general, we talked to Ryan Poles for maybe 20 minutes the other day, something like that. A bunch of wide-ranging topics, but obviously there was a lot of discussion about that first overall pick, and I thought that Poles made it fairly clear that he would prefer to trade the pick. He would never flat out say that, but I don't think that surprises anybody that he's potentially looking to do that. What are sort of your takeaways from what we heard from Ryan Poles this week?
Well, I think what Ryan knows is that, we keep focusing on Justin Fields and on the quarterbacks, but there's going to be 4 quarterbacks in the first round. I'm not sure that any of them are going to go number 1 overall. I mean, they're first round quarterbacks, but there isn't a Patrick Mahomes. I mean, there isn't a guy who you can say, yeah, he's our rookie starter and ready to win right now. I happen to like Stroud, and it's tough for me to say an Ohio State kid as a Michigan alum. I like him, more than the Alabama kid. The size there really bothers me a lot. You look at the kid from Kentucky, and he's a first rounder, but he's a Justin Fields first rounder. He's middle of the first round. He's later in the first round. I just think all of these quarterbacks probably fit best somewhere between, 4 and 20 as opposed to number 1 overall. And so even if they weren't sold on Justin Fields, I think it would be Brian in Poles' best interest to trade that first pick. And I think that they know that. And I think he was fairly honest with us when we talked about it on Tuesday.
If Bryce Young had 3 more inches and 15 more pounds, I mean, he'd be the guy, right?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's the 15 pounds. I think it's the 3 inches.
The 3 inches.
The fact that he's not even 6 feet or barely 6 feet it's really the only negative on the kid. Yeah, he does have the best college career, the best measurables, except for the size. But the size is a concern because that's really small for an NFL quarterback. And then you turn it around and you look at CJ Stroud. I mean, there's a couple questions about decisions that he makes and about some of the throws he makes, but he's got the perfect size, and he's not Justin Fields, but he's a good runner. He followed Justin Fields at Ohio State, so there are some comparisons there. I just think as I look at Fields right now and what the Bears have seen, I think that he is probably still as good a prospect as these 4 kids that are going in the first round. And that's why I think they're married to him. The other thing that hasn't been talked about much, but that people need to realize is if they trade this first round pick, they're not going to do it without getting at least 2 number 1s in return. They're going to trade the first round pick. They're going to get a 1 this year and a 1 next year from somebody. You need 1 more year to really get a feel for what you think you have in Justin Fields. And if you have 2 number 1s next year, you can be the team that turns around and gets the guy you want. And we already know that there's at least 1 kid who we think is going to be a better prospect than these 4, and there's going to be a few more. So just in terms of the best interest of a rebuild and the fact that it doesn't get done in 1 year, it just makes too much sense for the Bears to trade that pick, regardless of what they do with it.
That's a fantastic point. I mean, if you play through this year and Justin Fields isn't solving the problems that you want him to solve, and you have two first round picks next year, I mean, you're going to be able to go up and get whoever the heck you want. You're going to have the ammunition to do that. But yeah, that's predicated on getting that second first round pick and trading down this year. It comes down to how much some of these other teams value, especially when you're looking at Bryce Young. Yes, on tape he's a gamer. He's the quarterback you want. But the height issue is a problem, and that's going to matter to teams. I mean, it's probably going to be hit or miss as far as how much it matters. Team to team is going to have a different opinion on that. But I look at a popular trade scenario everyone's talking about is the Colts at number 4, and I kind of look at Chris Ballard's body of work as a GM, and I don't know. I kind of have a hard time seeing him going for a 5'11" quarterback. You look at that Colts team that he's built. There's a word that Ryan Poles used the other day. Everybody is long, and he's all those quarterbacks they've cycled through have been big dudes. I have a hard time seeing Chris Ballard and the Colts moving up for a Bryce Young, especially when if you're sitting at 4 or if you're the Texans sitting at 2, you can still get a quarterback. One of those 3 guys is probably going to be there unless the Cardinals do something crazy. And so I don't necessarily know if they need to move up to that number 1 spot with the Bears.
Well, I mean, that's the question mark right now. Is we know the Bears have had conversations with some teams that they've been contacted, but those teams thinking about making these deals are trying to figure out what they have to do and what they have to give up to get the guy they want. Again, the thing that is so unique about this Jalen Carter story is that while there are some folks I've talked to who question whether he could be the number 1 overall pick, I think a lot of people agree that without this other situation, he could be, because again, with these quarterbacks, forget these 4 that we're talking about. Look at the history of the NFL draft. Most of these first round quarterbacks don't work out. A strong majority of these first round quarterbacks don't work out. And that's why you have to be so careful with the assets that you have to use. You have to be really sold, on a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud. I even, think Anthony Anderson is in the conversation too. And I think that Stroud and Anderson, once this whole thing plays out over the next month or so, may both go ahead of Young because of the size is a real concern because of all the negatives that come with taking these kids in the first round. And we should even, as we visit right now, they haven't even started working out yet. That's just starting today. So far, they've just been talking to media. Granted, teams studying their tape from their college careers is going to be more important than what they do in one workout, here at the combine. But there's still so much more to learn about these guys, and there's so much more for them to understand. These face-to-face meetings that general managers and head coaches are having with these players to get to know them as people are what is most important about the combine. And that's going on right now, and they're still just learning about these kids. I don't know what Young can say or do that is going to, make teams comfortable with the fact that he's only 5'11" and a quarter. That just doesn't change. But it is.
He's not getting any taller.
Yeah, exactly.
He's done growing. Anthony Richardson, the Florida quarterback, he's an interesting one just because he's sort of that guy who as we get nearer and nearer to the draft, I feel like people are going to be talking about more and more because of the tools, and maybe not because of he's only been a starter 1 year at Florida, I think. Am I right about that?
He doesn't have the history that these other.
He doesn't have the tape or the body of work as far as starting multiple years, but he's got those tools, and we know how much NFL front offices love those tools and the ability to throw the ball and those big dudes. It's certainly a different scenario than when you're looking at Bryce Young.
I think what is intriguing about Richardson is he's coming from a big time school. He has played with good talent around him, and he has tremendous measurables, and he's got a great arm. And at the end of the day, a great arm is obviously, I shouldn't say the most important part, but it's a pretty important part with all this. And even though he just has the 1 full year where he went from, the middle of the draft to the first round, he showed enough in that he was making NFL throws. And I think that, that there are GMs, if you go back over the years and study the draft, they will go more with that, with what they can measure and what they can develop, than they will necessarily about what they've done in their college careers. And again, the one thing that poor Bryce can't overcome, is, I hate to keep saying it, he's just not going to get any bigger, and it's going to be, there's going to be a team that says, okay, we'll take a chance. But that's one of maybe a couple teams out there looking at at this pick. The rest of them are going to say, no, I just can't go there. I got to try one of the other guys.
All right, guys, we're going to hit some questions and comments. I'm going to throw this one out. This is non-football related, but our friend Triple R says, Elmo's Shrimp Cocktail, do they live up to the hype? I would say emphatically that they do. How about you, Hub?
Elmo's is a special place here at the Combine, and yes, they are known for the shrimp cocktail. I've never been as big an Elmo's fan as some. To me, it's more about it's what you have to do when you come to the Combine than it is the best restaurant I've ever been to. I not that anybody cares, but I haven't eaten red meat in 50 years, so it's not my place, but it is a great restaurant, and the shrimp cocktail definitely lives up. There's no question about that.
Yeah, it'll wake you up. You feel that one instantly. Guys, if you got thoughts, comments, questions, Bears questions, draft questions, hit us up in the chat. If you're watching on the Twitter feed, click through to the YouTube link and you can put your questions in there. Our buddy Mark Potash over at the Sun Times. You also have to look at Jim Irsay's body of work when considering the trade possibilities for the Colts. He's the desperate one, and yeah, that is a great point, Mark, because Chris Ballard can think whatever he wants, but Jim Irsay is running the show right now. I think that's pretty clear in the things that he's been saying. And, you see that video of Irsay praising Bryce Young, not by name, but saying, oh, the Alabama quarterback's pretty good. And you can just feel Chris Ballard seething a couple seats over, trying to figure out what he's going to do with that.
Yeah, Mark, it's a great point, because the key to the Bears is to find not the guy who's willing to take a chance on Young. It's finding the guy who wants him, the guy who's already made up his mind. And we do know that they are, as I shouldn't say desperate at quarterback as anybody, but as committed to getting a new quarterback. And so that is, the team to keep an eye on right now.
We got another question here from our buddy Mike Johnson. Talking running backs, how far down is too early to draft Bijan Robinson? What do you think about that?
This is how do I say this without insulting anybody? One of the narrowest running back classes I can ever remember seeing in the draft. There's just not a lot of running backs that anybody is excited about. Now, if you look at the great running backs historically, again, they're not, obviously Walter Payton was, there are first round running backs, but, many of the greatest running backs of all time are third rounders, fifth rounders. You can get them all over the place. How far down is too early to draft Bijan Robinson? He's not a first round pick. I can tell you that. But if you like the kid, it's never too far down. Off what I've seen so far, what I've studied so far, I'm guessing because there are not a lot of high quality running backs, that'll help him go a little higher than you might expect. But third, fourth round, that'd be my best guess. And again, I'm not trying to cop out on you guys, but they're starting working out today and tomorrow. There is so much of this process that still has to develop before teams put their boards together. And particularly with running backs, there's so many great college, running backs who don't become great NFL players. It's a tough position to draft. And so there's a lot more work to do on Robinson before any team decides where they want to go get him.
Yeah, he's certainly looking like the best running back of the bunch this year. Somebody will probably take a chance on him and maybe do that fairly high, but I don't know that the Bears are in position to do that. Hub, this is a little bit off topic as far as the draft, but we're talking running backs, and I think the last episode or two, Kyle and I were talking a lot about David Montgomery and the running back position for the Bears. Do you think there's any chance that he's coming back, or whether that's via franchise tag or via an extension, or is Ryan Poles ready to just let him walk and find a cheaper option at that running back spot?
Well, they've got money to spend, and franchising him isn't going to, use a ton of that money. And they've got a bunch of other guys, but he is clearly, their best right now. And they have so much else that they need to add to become competitive. I think they should franchise him if that's what they have to do. Maybe they can even get a 2 or 3 year deal done at a reasonable price. I kind of like the guy. I'm not saying that he's the next Walter, but I mean, there's so much other work that appears to be more important right now that I think it would be in their best interest to find a way to hold on to him and let him grow with whoever they add. The franchise tag for a running back isn't going to break the bank for them, and so I do think, yeah, I just think it would be a mistake to let him get away based on what he provided this year, and you still don't know if you've gotten the best out of him. I mean, when you're trying to play running back on one of the worst passing teams in the NFL, it's tough. And he still, got 800 yards,
Yep.
so I think they really should do whatever they have to hold on to him for at least one more season.
I've kind of been of the opinion that they should franchise tag him as well, Hub, and Kyle, who, guys, if you're missing Kyle, he's on vacation this week. He's out hiking in Nevada, having a good time. So we're missing him, but hopefully he's having a good trip. Kyle has not agreed with me when I said that they should franchise tag him. But I think it makes too much sense when you got all this salary cap space available.
Yeah, Sean, I think you're making a great point. This is not about, is Montgomery going to be a Pro Bowler? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about where this team is at right now, what they need to make significant strides this season. They're not going to be a playoff team. They're not going to have a Pro Bowl running back. But he's the best they've got right now. He was pretty good this year, when healthy. And so I think that with so much other work to do, it's just not that expensive to hang on to him for one more season, give him a chance to earn his big contract. I don't think that he'd even probably mind that all that much, because he's not, if he leaves, he isn't going to get a big contract. It's not like somebody else is going to sign him as their future at the position. So I think it makes sense to do what they have to hang on to him for at least one more year.
There's a lot of running backs on the free agent market this year. We've talked about that, and that's going to certainly make it harder. We think potentially make it harder for David Montgomery to get a big time payday. But yeah, I mean, Hub, you're right. Like, if he has if they franchise tag him and he stays one more year and he has a really, really good season next year, I mean, that's only going to help him make more money in the next cycle if he gets free agency a year from now. I'm going to go to a question here from our buddy Alan Dunlop. Why is everybody assuming that Jim Irsay is the most desperate owner? Vegas has no quarterback. Carolina has a new owner wanting to make an impact. I kind of think that's a fair point. I mean, somebody during Josh McDaniels' media session yesterday asked him a question, and McDaniels was like, "Yeah, I wake up every day thinking about the quarterback position." Which maybe doesn't surprise you when you just let go of your 9-year veteran and you have nobody at the position. I could see them being one of those teams that's in the market for a veteran, though. But the point is true. I mean, those are two other desperate teams that need to figure out that quarterback spot. The more being here this week and talking to people, the more I've sort of come around to the idea that Carolina could be that team that potentially trades up from number 9. They're right now they're fairly low in terms of if a couple of teams want quarterbacks in those top 5 spots. I mean, Carolina is going to be sitting there empty-handed, and so maybe that's impetus for them to go up and get somebody. They haven't really invested in a young quarterback in the draft. They've also been another team that's gone through a couple of veterans over the last couple of years. Hub, what do you think about the Raiders and the Panthers?
Alan, I think it's a great question, but the reason everybody's assuming Jim Irsay is the most desperate is because he keeps acting like the most desperate. Other than that, there are at least 5 or 6 teams that would like to get their quarterback of the future this year, and they all know that there are only 3 or 4 that have been given those kind of grades, and that traditionally, if you decide you have found the one, you do have to do it with the first overall pick. So it's not like Irsay is the only one. He's just his team is making the most noise. But as we continue to work on this, I've identified at least 6 teams that I think are a possibility to trade for the first round pick, and there's still 1 or 2 more that I haven't taken off the list yet. So that's good news for the Bears, but the other piece of this, guys, is that are any of these 4 or 3 quarterbacks, depending on which ones you like the best, going to go number one? And that's the only thing that impacts the Bears is somebody going to go to number one? And the fact that we don't know what's happening with Carter now is making it a little more complicated.
Jailbreak says, thoughts on the pass rushers other than Anderson? What do you think about some of these other guys? We got Wilson, we got Van Ness. There's a couple of good options there if you're looking for pass rushers. I'll say, listening to Lucas Van Ness, who's a Barrington native, by the way, yesterday, he comes out there, man, that dude, if you wanted to build an athlete and you wanted to make sure that he had good hair, I mean, that's sort of what would come out. That dude's chiseled, and he's got the hair, and he's looking good up there at the podium.
Defensive line is the position this year. Now, that's not quite the same thing as pass rusher, and I think that when I look at the Bears, they need both. They need edge rusher, a Pro Bowl level edge rusher, but they also need a couple defensive tackles. And defensive tackles do rush the quarterback, and some of the best right now are tackles and not necessarily edge rushers. So it is, I think, the deepest position in this draft. We talked about Jalen Carter, we talked about Will Anderson. I think that. And I've got the whole list here, guys. I think I mentioned Tree Wilson, Nolan Smith, also out of Georgia. Could benefit from, unfortunately, whatever negatives there are with Carter right now. Lucas Van Ness, I don't think he tore it up at Iowa the way I would have liked him to, but he definitely has a late first round grade. Miles Murphy from Clemson, Will Donald, out of Iowa State. You can you want a defensive tackle, go look at Brian Young out of Alabama. The defensive line is loaded. And that's kind of the good news for the Bears. If they trade that first round pick, and which team is going to give them the most, if their first rounder this year is 10 or 17, you're not real happy about that. But if you're still committed to the defensive line in the first round with the Bears, and you get maybe 3 first round picks, which has happened before, you can make that deal and still get the guy you want in the middle of the first round.
Yeah, guys, we got about a little bit under 10 minutes here. We're going to cut it off at about 45 minutes. We do appreciate you joining us. If you're listening in the on the podcast forum, of course, you can find us anywhere you get your podcast, through Apple, through Spotify. But if you're listening, you can join us live on YouTube. We normally go at 9:30 on Fridays. We switched it up a little bit just because we're here in Indianapolis at the Combine. We wanted to get to you guys before we left town. So guys, hit us up with any other last questions you have in the comments. We're going to wrap it up here in a couple of minutes, but we do appreciate you contributing and joining us and keeping the conversation going. It's certainly a fun time to be covering the NFL. There's a lot of optimism from a lot of teams out there right now, and rightfully so. It's an exciting time of year. You got free agency just around the corner. We've got the draft coming up in April. We'll be here covering it all from the Bears perspective at shawlocal.com all off season long, as always. Hub, we're halfway through the Combine here, at least I should point out, as you've been saying, they haven't really even started working out yet. So we haven't gotten through that portion of it, but we're through our media portion, at least halfway through. Who else are you excited to learn more about here the second half of this week?
Well, guys, I got here Monday night with my list of the work that we have done so far based on the college football season. It is now, not even lunchtime yet on Thursday. And I would say, and the reason I don't know if you guys are watching me looking at this list, I've already say I've changed it by 50%. I mean, as we get to talk to some of these kids, and more importantly, as we get to talk to all the NFL people who are here and find out what they're willing to tell us and what they're thinking. And these lists are going to change so much over the next, 4, 5, 6 weeks that tune in with us every week as we give you what's been happening, lately. And, as far as where we're at right now, the players that we came to town with, I'm intrigued by the tight ends, because really the Bears need pass catchers, not just wide receivers. And I like Cole Kmet a lot, and I think that he will be here, obviously, at least this year and maybe even beyond. I think he's a guy that they should try and work out a deal with, but they don't have any depth there at all. And there are some good tight ends. Now, again, it's not going to happen in the first round. You look at, the kids from Notre Dame and Utah, and we're talking about Dalton Kincaid and Michael Mayer. They're probably going to be gone by the time the Bears start thinking tight end. But then if you start looking in the second round, or I don't know how many picks the Bears are going to add, and Luke Musgrave for Oregon State is a kid that I've watched a fair amount of tape on, and he's somebody that really intrigued me a bit. And I like Tucker Kraft from San Diego State. Look at what the Chiefs did this year. And their whole passing game is built around their tight end, if you think about it. And it's a position I think the Bears need to get better at. Then you go to the offensive line, and some of these offensive tackles, I mean, there's just nothing but studs. I'm not, again, it's hard for me to like Ohio State. I'm kidding. I went to Michigan. But Paris Johnson is probably, I don't know if him or the Northwestern kid, Skoronski, is going to be the first offensive tackle taken. They may go, at the same time, like 5 and 6, something like that. But they are high first round picks, and then you move on to Broderick Jones. Again, we've got so many Georgia kids, so many, different high profile program type players. But the Bears, we shouldn't be married to the idea that they have to take a pass rusher in the first round. They need a pass rusher. They need a wide receiver. They need offensive line help. I think they need more at tight end. They could probably even use another linebacker. So that's what's fun about this whole draft process, is getting to learn about these kids and making our lists and adjusting our lists. But those are just a few names I'd keep an eye on. And again, guys, I'd look closely at the wide receivers, because a big part of developing Justin Fields is getting him more help at the receiving position. And so the wide receivers and the tight ends are players you got to keep an eye on.
You're right on the pulse of our audience here, because Timothy was asking about tight ends, and I do think that that's an interesting or a good point, because the Bears really, they only had one last year. Cole Kmet, dominated the snap count, dominated in terms of targets and receptions at that tight end spot, and obviously the really good teams out there. Travis Kelce is doing amazing things for the Chiefs. Some of these other top teams, they might have one dominant tight end, but it doesn't stop there. That doesn't mean that their second tight end isn't a really good player who can step in when needed. And certainly that's a position that the Bears got to keep building on. We got another comment here from Triple R, and I'm going to assume this question is for Hub, because I've only been doing the combine for a couple of years. But how much bigger, stronger, and faster are these guys since you first started covering the draft?
Twice as big. I mean, basically Pro Football Weekly invented independent draft analysis. I've been doing this for 45 years now. And for the first 20 years or so, we were really the only ones covering the draft and publishing our books and putting all this out. Joel Buxbaum is a legendary draft analyst who I hired in 1978, I think was the year that we hired him. And back in the day, when we started doing this, the really big offensive and defensive linemen were 265, 270 pounds. Now they're 350, and that's just the one obvious position to start with. The wide receivers have gotten so much bigger. You never had a 6'3", 6'5" wide receiver that weighed 230, 235 pounds. Even the quarterbacks have gotten bigger. 5'11" was always too short, but most of the quarterbacks were, 6'1", 6'2", now they're 6'5", 6'4". I'm trying to think of other positions. The linebackers have pretty much stayed the same. Safeties, I mean, there are some huge safeties now who would have been thought not fast enough because of their size to play the position 25 years ago. But yeah, the game has changed with size and speed. I mean, the fact that there's guys running 4.3 40s, when I started covering the draft, we weren't even measuring the 40. Teams were, but, we weren't even aware of that. But the speed is the speed of the big guys has changed more than the speed of the running backs and the receivers. They've always been fast, but the way these big guys run today, it's just it's like nothing we could have imagined 25 years ago.
Alan says, I had a PFW draft preview with Jalen Carter on it. That must have been what, the 90s?
Again, we've done so many of them. I remember the name Jalen Carter, but I can't remember what year he was. But yeah, we did it. We did our first draft preview book in 1979.
I haven't been around that long.
Yeah, and so, boy, there's a lot of names that have come and gone over the years. I actually, I hope you guys had a chance to read the piece I did the other day, because I had fun with it. I don't know if anybody enjoyed it, but I enjoyed it. In talking about the Bears' needs right now on the defensive line, the Chicago Bears 1985 defensive line is considered by many to be the best defensive line in the history of the National Football League. Dan Hampton, who was a first-round draft choice and a Pro Bowler. By the way, this is a fun little note, but the only not just Pro Bowler, but Hall of Famer in history to have been a Pro Bowler at both defensive end and defensive tackle is my buddy Dan Hampton, and the Bears took him in the first round. William Perry was a first-round pick, and yet you move on. And you get to, the third round, the eighth round. But that Bears defensive line in 1985 was arguably the best defensive line of all time. And that was right at the heart of, we had just been, covering the draft for, 10 years at that point, and people were just learning about those guys. But a lot of folks had never heard of Dan Hampton when the Bears drafted him in the first round. And that doesn't happen anymore. The way we cover the draft now, every guy who gets taken and a bunch of guys who get signed as undrafted free agents, because that's how much fun it is to follow it now.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it, Hub. Guys, go over, check out Hub's column, comparing what the Bears are trying to build right now to what they were building in the early 80s, shawlocal.com. You can find all our coverage from the combine. We're going to keep writing about the draft over the coming weeks here as we get closer and closer. Hub, this has been fun. It's been great having you back on.
Well, I've missed it, guys, and it's great to be back. I was cleared for full-time duty about 10 days ago, and so plan to be working harder and doing a better job remembering all the names and everything, which we're still struggling with a little bit. But by the time we get to by the time we get to the draft, I can promise you that you're going to have the best information available anywhere right here at Shaw. And we're going to be doing this every week. And it's great to get to visit with everybody. And I look forward to talking to you all at least once a week, for the next couple months as we get ready for what's going to be an exciting season for Chicago Bears fans.
Thank you, everybody, for listening and joining and hitting us up in the chat with your questions. As always, this has been the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. I'm Sean Hammond. He's Hub Arkush. Thanks for joining us, everybody.